Motorsport's greatest show relies on several essential elements for its operation. Obviously, the highly technological single-seaters are part of these most essential elements. The drivers are the figures who put a face and hands to the different teams. Not to mention the mechanics, the glamour, and many other elements. But one of the most important, and without which this circus couldn't go on, are the racetracks. Global locations enable racing and thrilling competitions. Locations that come in different types: permanent street circuits, inside public parks, semi-street circuits, and many more. And throughout the rich history of Formula 1, many circuits have come to life and have had long and exciting lives within the category. But others are not so lucky. There are cases of countries that assemble or build circuits to attract the big circus. But these end up failing, and the failure is so big and monumental that they end up losing Formula 1 shortly after. The circuits gradually fall into abandonment and extinction. Today, a new miniseries debuts on the channel. A miniseries sharing the sad fate of tracks that once brought Formula 1 to life. But unfortunately, due to different circumstances, they ended up being abandoned. A mini-series that, with your support, will have several episodes, and in each episode we'll tell you about 3 abandoned tracks. So ladies and gentlemen, let's begin Volume 1 of Extinct Formula 1 Circuits. But before we start this video, I think it's time to tell you about the main sponsor of the team, Skyline Racing. Regular viewers probably know what we're talking about. But if not, we're talking about our favorite virtual private network system to browse the internet with unlimited privacy and total security. We're obviously talking about the VPN called Surfshark. On this platform, you can protect against threats, find better prices on things like plane tickets, and connect to public Wi-Fi. Skyline Racing mainly uses the IP change feature to access content blocked in my country. I use that to gather information for my videos from sources like Formula 1, DAZ and Sky Sports, and various media outlets worldwide. I'm not going to lie, I also use it for my own entertainment. And right now that Better Call Saul is back and it airs several hours earlier in the United States, I use it to watch the series before anything else. That way I can avoid spoilers. But look, so that you, just like me, can try it out and don't think it's just some story from the old man. I'll share my Skyline Racing code so you get 83% off and 3 free months when signing up for this service. And so you can feel more at ease and be encouraged to try it. If you don't like it, you have a full money-back guarantee. So I suggest you don't miss this opportunity. And just like me, give the world of VPNs a try with Surfshark. Returning to the globe is nostalgic, but stay focused. Skyline Racing. It's time to settle in one of Brazil's richest and most beautiful areas, Rio de Janeiro, to tell you about the first extinct circuit called Nelson Piquet Autodrome, but better known as Jacarepaguá Autodrome. In 1978, the now extinct Nelson Piquet Autodrome took it from Interlagos, the honor of hosting the Brazilian Grand Prix and the race at its circuit. And although it wouldn't compete at Jacarepaguá in 79 and 1980. From 1981 to 1989, it hosted this Grand Prix, which would be the final Grand Prix held at this circuit. The Nelson Piquet Autodrome's history dates back to before the early 1970s, when it is commonly believed to have started. In 1965, construction began on the Nova Caledonia Autodrome, a racetrack built right in the area where the Jacarepaguá Autodrome was constructed, a modern racetrack for its time, and one that was unique because it was built on a swampy area. It was also designed by Ayrton Lolo, who later created the Estoril Autodrome in Portugal. By 1971, after state government approval, driven by an ambitious project featuring a tourist complex, hotels, marina, and various sports facilities, the track started reconstruction to host top categories in one of Brazil's most touristy areas. The major projects around the Carrera circuit were never finished because the governor then took possession of the surrounding land to build the Barra da Tijuca neighborhood, an area where a lot of condominiums were established. Despite this, the track's construction continued, though political obstacles repeatedly stalled the project. After 5 difficult years, the track was finally built in 1977 and inaugurated with a motorcycle competition. With the track ready, they took advantage of teams' concerns about Interlagos circuit's poor facilities. also motivated by better infrastructure and racing in a more appealing city than São Paulo. On January 29, 1978, Rio de Janeiro made its dream come true and would host the Formula One race after the Argentine Grand Prix. The Brazilian circuit was 5 kilometers long and had 11 turns where usually 61 laps were completed to finish the races. A track that crossed an oval section with an internal circuit. Many people enjoyed Jacarepaguá, finding it a fun and motivating challenge. For 10 seasons, this circuit hosted top-tier motorsport. Frenchman Alain Prost was the top winner on this track, securing 5 victories. It was also where local hero Nelson Piquet won at home twice, in 1983 and 1986. And where the first winner of this Grand Prix was the Argentine Carlos Reutemann, who, with his Ferrari, opened the track's victory tally and would repeat the win in 1981. The last winner of this competition was Nigel Mansell in 1989. During those 10 seasons, the race was usually among the first on the calendar, and many teams used these facilities for their winter testing. Positioning itself as a glamorous destination, with the paradise-like city as a backdrop and a track and facilities most teams liked. After 1989, the Grand Circus returned to Interlagos and never raced again at the Rio de Janeiro circuit. I bet you're wondering why Formula One left this circuit. Well, you might remember that earlier we mentioned how Rio de Janeiro had taken the date away from Sao Paulo, and during the 10 years Formula One wasn't at Interlagos, the Grand Circus in Brazil grew popular due to legendary Formula One drivers like Senna and Nelson Piquet making history, and knowing the economic and political impact that the Brazilian Grand Prix brought. The current governor of São Paulo made it one of his main goals to bring the top Categoria back to its old home. They knew perfectly well that as a city, it was impossible to compete against Rio de Janeiro. So if they wanted to achieve their goal, they would have to beat Rio in 2 different areas, facilities and money. And with that in mind, Interlagos began a remodeling process on its layout, in which the track was reduced from its impressive 7 kilometers to just 4.2. They renovated the facilities, spending about $50 million and finishing the first step of their plan. The people of São Paulo negotiated a better contract with Formula One management than they had with Rio de Janeiro, leaving Jacarepaguá in a checkmate, requiring them to upgrade their facilities and offerings to compete with Interlagos and retain the Brazilian Grand Prix. Something they couldn't match, so they decided to let Formula One go and instead bet on the Carta Series project. These American venues were seen as a good choice due to the championship's growth and many notable Brazilian participants. And this category lasted from 1996 until the year 2000, where interestingly, the first winner was the local Alberto Ribeiro and the last winner was the Mexican Adrian Fernandez. After this, the category left the track. It was the last major competition at Nelson Piquet Autodrome, and where the path toward the decline and extinction of the Jacarepaguá circuit would begin. And yes, at this point is where we now tell you what happened to the track. After the main categories left, the track was still used for local car and motorcycle championships, but it gradually fell into disuse. And with the growing population in Rio de Janeiro, more condominiums started to appear in the Barra da Tijuca neighborhood. Given the abandonment of the track, they began to consider the idea of taking the land from the circuit to build more houses in the area. However, the end of Jacarepaguá didn't come with the aforementioned condominiums, but rather with the Olympic Games. But to be more precise, it began with the Pan American Games, and that's because Rio de Janeiro applied to host the Olympic Games. But for that, they would have to create infrastructure that would allow them to host this sporting event. What about the Pan American Games they were already set to host? The government demolished part of the track to build the Sports City complex for the 2007 Pan American Games. They destroyed a little less than half of the track, making it impossible to use it as an oval. What about the former Brazilian Grand Prix circuit? Only the 3.23 kilometer short version remained, used by Brazilian series like Stock Car Brazil and Formula 3 Sudamericana. However, the final nail in its coffin would come in 2009, since on October 2nd of that year, Rio de Janeiro was selected as the host of the world's biggest sporting event in 2016. And with that, obviously, they would have to start a process of building the necessary infrastructure for the event. And among all the decisions made that year, they decided to demolish the Nelson Piquet racetrack to build the Olympic Park for the Rio Games there. The demolition began in 2012 and left no trace of that iconic racetrack. This place now serves as Brazil's Olympic training headquarters, having fulfilled its role after the Games. This decision not only caused the circuit to disappear, but also means Rio de Janeiro still lacks a racetrack for competitions. There was talk in past years of creating a new circuit with Jair Bolsonaro's approval, but it never happened. Concluding Rio de Janeiro's story with Motorsports for Now, featuring the first defunct circuit of this miniseries. To continue with today's chapter, we'll have to travel to the other end of the continent, a journey from Brazil to the United States, but more precisely to Sin City, to tell you about what many consider the worst circuit in the history of Formula One, the circuit located in Las Vegas, known as the Caesars Palace Street Circuit. Some people might currently be excited or furious about the arrival of the Grand Prix in Las Vegas for 2023. But the category already has history in this sinful city. A story behind one of F1's most infamous tracks. But let's not get ahead of ourselves and begin in the 1960s. At that time, Las Vegas casino and hotel owners had already shown interest in motorsports. Races were held at Stardust Raceway, a local circuit, but its fate was unremarkable and certain. Until in 1980, taking advantage of the media boom and the glamour that accompanies the Grand Circus, the owners of the famous Caesars Palace Casino came up with an idea that looked wonderful on paper. To organize a Grand Prix that would attract the glamour of the top category and make the crowds who wanted to see the event spend money in Las Vegas. In the casinos, hotels, restaurants, and many other attractions Las Vegas offers tourists. They managed to sweeten the ear of Bernie Ecclestone, the former boss of the Grand Circus, with this project, which secured them a contract to host the final round of the category in 1981. On a circuit that, well, would be built in the parking lot of that casino. Widely criticized by everyone, it was clearly an improvised circuit in Caesars Palace parking lot. It didn't match the opulent vision of the Grand Circus and Las Vegas. Also, the circuit's layout looked terrible when revealed. A really simple and totally monotonous track that caught practically no one's attention. The Grand Prix covered 3 kilometers per lap with 75 laps completed in total. Still, Formula One insisted on getting its way, no matter what. On October 17, 1981, Las Vegas hosted its first Grand Prix. This would feature an exciting title battle between Carlos Reutemann, Nelson Piquet, and Jacques Lafitte. But the race itself, despite being dramatic, was for many a disappointing Grand Prix. The event was most notable for the many reliability failures among teams, and where, in the end, Nelson Piquet would end up prevailing to win the title against a Reutemann who had problems with his car throughout the entire race. The harshest criticism came from drivers who called the track the worst they'd ever driven on. John Watson said the flat terrain and high barriers made it hard to find reference points while driving. He also said it was the least attractive Grand Prix he had ever raced in, calling it a direct blow to the gut. Alan Jones, the former world champion, also mocked the track, calling it a flattened goat trail. Criticism that, of course, did not sit well at all with the owners of the different casinos who had put up the money for organizing the race. In that case, there would be another title fight in the final race between Keke Rosberg, Didier Pironi, and John Watson. Economically, the result was not what the organizers expected. Although the 1982 race was more exciting, the Grand Circus still said a temporary goodbye to Las Vegas that season. Now then, let's resolve the question of why the circuit left Formula One. The circuit was abandoned for economic reasons. Since large crowds and gamblers never arrived in 2 years, the Grand Prix was becoming an economic failure. And what about Formula One? Realizing the track wasn't appealing, he accepted Las Vegas's withdrawal and focused on other United States locations like Dallas, Detroit, or Phoenix. And really, there's not much else to say about it. Honestly, its story is nearly as disappointing as the parking lot circuit. But let's not focus on that, and instead let's move on to see what happened with this Las Vegas circuit. After losing the top category in 1982, the organizers and casino owners decided to focus on another increasingly popular project. In 1983 and 1984, the Caesar Palace parking lot again became a race circuit, this time for single-seaters. Union, now they would change the layout from a standard track to an oval circuit. Similarly, it wouldn't have much history, since after 1985, they lost interest and left motor competitions. And clearly, by missing the expected economic boost. Afterward, the Caesar Palace Casino chose to abandon motorsports and focus solely on betting. Since the track's location, they built the Mirage Casino, extended the main hotel, and added a luxury shopping mall, thus ending a circuit with little history and a mostly shameful presence. But this city will have its rematch in 2023, and we'll see if things improve this time, or simply and plainly. This shows us that Formula One doesn't learn, and once again, it's more of the same. For today's final circuit, we will need to move from one continent to another, more precisely, to the country of Germany, introducing one of motorsport's most historic tracks. The Hockenheimring. Hey, take that hand off there. Yeah, I know what you're about to do. You're going to go to the comments and tell me to get my facts straight because the Hockenheimring isn't extinct. You're right, but for this story, we're not discussing the version you know. We're talking about the circuit that existed before 2001, and that was very different from how we know it today. The most experienced ones in the Grand Circus already know what I'm talking about, and others don't, but be patient, believe me, you'll understand soon. Well, after this little interruption, let's start again. The Hockenheimring is a racing circuit located in the region of Bueno-Hockenheim. In 1970, it officially debuted in Formula 1 as the host of the German Grand Prix, a recurring event that was on the calendar for years. From 1977 to 1984 and from 1986 to 2006 without interruption. This legendary track's history began in 1930 thanks to Ernest Christ and his young assistant. A local timekeeper wanted to organize a motor race in his hometown. A dream inspired them to pitch the idea to Hockenheim's mayor, Philipp Kahn-Cuyen. At Christmas in 1931, backed by the city council, he approved plans to build a racing circuit in the region. A construction that, surprisingly, would begin 2 months later, and by May 25, 1932, would be celebrating its first race, motorcycle race. This marked the start of a long relationship between this town and motorsports, but soon after, World War II began. This battle severely damaged the facilities because armored vehicles crossed the track. In addition, the war had also destroyed all the surrounding facilities that were built for the circuit. But such was the passion of these people for motorsport that they themselves took it upon themselves to repair the circuit. And after establishing in 1947 an association dedicated exclusively to the management of this track, and after having repaired and rebuilt the circuit, racing resumed in the region by May 1947. But not satisfied with this, the circuit kept being renovated over time. Due to increasing urbanization in the region from 1961 to 1966, Hockenheim would need another change, adding a new pit straight, the stadium section, and a fully renovated layout. Changes that created this beast of a circuit. A 6.8-kilometer track with long straights and occasional chicanes, resembling an oval, and where very high speeds were reached, as it was an incredibly fast racing circuit. And in 1970, Hockenheim would host its first Formula 1 Grand Prix, taking the date away from the Nordschleife, better known as Nürburgring or the Green Hell. But the general feeling that the drivers had about the circuit was that it was much less exciting than its counterpart in the Eifel region. After the 1970 edition, the category returned to the Green Hell. Because of the track's high danger, the Grand Circus abandoned it in 1977. Thus, Hockenheim hosted the German Grand Prix until 2006 except in 1985. And yes, Hockenheim had Formula 1 until 2019, but after 2001, it would not be the same 6-kilometer long Hockenheim that brought the German Grand Prix to life. Because after that season, the circuit underwent a radical redesign, removing this high-speed section for a much smaller, entirely different internal complex, thus ending the legendary long Hockenheim circuit. By now, many of you are likely wondering why it was shortened. And why was this long configuration never used again? The answer is the following, and believe me, it's really simple. By 1999, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile demanded changes to the circuit if they wanted to keep the German Grand Prix beyond 2001. Because the highest governing body of motorsport considered that the track was too long. And because a large part of the circuit went through the surrounding forest. The facilities were not friendly for the public who came to watch the Grand Prix. They realized they needed to expand the grandstands and improve public access to keep the race. After the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile's ultimatum, the organization held a public consultation to decide the circuit's future. Because keeping the Grand Prix in the city was the priority, they chose to shorten and fully redesign the track. This led to Hermann Tilke redesigning the layout in December 2001, resulting in the version we know today. Although the track is good and achieves its goal as a fast circuit for battles and overtaking, many longtime F1 fans miss the circuit's former long impressive straights. And that brings us to our last question of the day. What happened to this old layout? The answer is simple, but it's tough for those who miss the old track. During remodeling, the track section through the forest was removed and replaced with newly planted trees, thus eliminating any possibility of seeing this circuit again in a historic race. Currently, aerial shots reveal a line through the trees and vegetation in the forest, which remains as a reminder that a race circuit once existed there. Because of this, the old Hockenheimring became completely extinct and there is no chance that it will ever reappear. That's why we're telling you that this case is no exception to the rule. Because the circuit still exists, but the old layout that hosted the German Grand Prix until 2001 no longer does. The last defunct circuit on our list for this mini-series. With that, the first chapter on defunct Formula 1 circuits ends. But this is where I ask you, did you know the history of these circuits? Did you ever watch a race or know about any of these Grand Prix events? Which one was your favorite? And what do you think about their disappearance? Let me know all your opinions in the comments section. I'll be happy to read each and every one of you. To wrap up, if you enjoyed the video, please give a thumbs up and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you know when I'm uploading a new video, and share this one with your friends. Also, I invite you to follow us on our Instagram and Twitter accounts. The link will be in the description of this video. And I'll see you in future episodes here on your channel, Skyline Racing. Thank you for tuning in, and see you later.